I'm Dr. Marsha Sanity.
And I'm Dr. Caleb Moore.
And this is
the Free Smiles Podcast.
So it's a Thursday. I guess we're not used to filming on a Thursday, so this is kind of fun. I do want to apologize ahead of time that I was skiing today, so I'm still wearing my ski socks, if anyone's
That's amazing.
wanting to know what's happening over here, but we're in it.
It's great.
It's my day off. I'm allowed to go skiing.
You are.
So today we are talking about really our personal financial journeys and just the things that we have learned, going through dental school and the advice that we get, and then coming out of dental school and figuring out what that actually looks like and what our personal goals are will change over time. But I think coming out of school, we all have the same goal in mind, which is not being in debt.
Financial freedom.
Yeah. Yes. So what are some things that you remember kind of hearing in dental school that either helped you or things that you just remember being like, oh, that's something that I can use today?
Yeah, I think, when we're in dental school, we have all of this information being thrown at us. You should invest into this market. You should get a financial planner. Do you have disability insurance? Do you have life insurance? And it's all very confusing because, our degree is in dentistry. It's not in finance. And for me, I've always been really smart with my financials and making sure that, bills are paid and I have money to save. And if I were to have an accident, that I could cover that. But coming out of dental school, I knew that I was going to be making a lot of, you think you're going to be making a lot of money or more money than what you're used to. So what avenue do you take? And for me, I was very confused. And, there was this funny thing, and we've talked about it there were two different financial advising companies that would come into the dental school and just like wine and dine you, right? Like throw these events and talk to you about, what their company can offer you, but what does all of it mean, and how are you researching that and feeling comfortable in what you're doing? And for me, I honestly had no idea,
So I think, one thing that you just said, which I thought is kind of important to talk about, is I think our unique experiences is that we both kind of grew up, at least me, I mean, I know you probably have a similar experience. We both grew up with not a lot of financial knowledge. Like, it's not like at my, dinner table, my dad was talking about financial anything, it was more like you worked, you paid your bills. He, obviously coming from like a pension type of job, like that was your retirement and that's what he lived off of. But I think coming out of that experience and me working as a hygienist and just, I really was more the mindset of I was always a saver. Like that was my way of being financially strong, was just being like, I'm never going to spend more than I make.
Yeah.
I didn't have any investments. Like coming out of undergrad, I didn't invest in anything. I was just like, hey, I also was working like 2 jobs. So where would I spend my money? Nowhere. I had no time. But I think coming out of that, it was more like I was just a saver. I never wanted to be poor again. I never wanted to run down that road of needing, also like I didn't have that. I didn't have that opportunity to be like, hey, if I F this up, I don't have someone to fall back and help me. I don't have parents to call to be like, hey, can you spot me for rent? It was like everything was on me. So I felt like my frugality was more of like a trauma response. Like I'm gonna be on the streets if I don't get this figured out. So I think knowing that, and I think that financial part of it always resonated with me, just being like wanting to always learn about financial stuff. So I would listen to certain podcasts. I would listen to people that I knew that are successful in some ways. And sometimes you learn that those people that you think are successful because they have all these things are not the most financially sound people at the end of the day. They're spending what they make. They're not saving any of that money. They're not investing any of that money. They're not thinking of the long term.
Yep.
And I think that has 100% changed how I've looked at things probably in the past, I would say 6 to 7 years, because I thankfully have been turned on to a lot of like women's investing groups that I started attending, and just these little meetups about, and it could be real estate investing that they're talking about. It could be personal financial stuff that they're talking about. And I think all those, just spending my time trying to like absorb all the energy, the energy and the knowledge of other people has really brought me to being like, now I own a home. Now I technically have rentals that I'm, going to be subsidizing, further investments into, or, not being just, hey, I'm spending all my money on this, and at the end of the day, all I have is a 401k kind of a thing.
Yeah, you're diversifying your portfolio, right? With this, with the money that you have now, you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and you're utilizing the resources that you have available to you, and that you've worked hard for. We've worked really hard to get to this point in life, and it's not like we're flowing in cash, right?
Definitely not.
Definitely not. But along with that, the little money that we do have set aside, it's where are you putting that, and what is the return going to be? And is it a short game for you, or is it a long-term game? And I think that's really important. Another thing, that you talked about was just shifting your mindset in general, because a lot of people, in America, they work to pay their bills, to get by, and then they get paid again, and that's not the reality for people who are in our shoes, I mean, we lived that life, but now we have a different life, and although we didn't have the, mentors or resources growing up of people who were financially, stable and sound, we can now seek out other resources to get there. I'm not going to take health advice from someone who's eating fast food every day,
Right.
So it's finding the resources of people who have been successful, and are the techniques that they're using, and what are they investing in? Does that work for you? And is that going to be something that's doable for your life? And, you talked about, just putting money into a 401k. I do think that's really important. Stepping out of dental school and starting my first associateship, they offered a 401k match, and I thought that was incredible. Well, looking at it now, I know that that's incredible, but
Right.
in the beginning, I didn't really know what it meant. They matched up to a certain percentage, and I could put a certain percentage away. And looking at it, a year later into that associateship, I checked my retirement account, and there's substantial growth because the company is investing in you, and they're matching what you're putting in. And I'm not a financial advisor by any means.
Oh, yeah, we should say that we're not financial advisors.
Do not take
not take our advice as financial advice. We are just dentists trying to figure out life.
Exactly.
But that's a good point.
Yeah, so I do think, while that shouldn't be the only way that you're saving money or preparing for the future, it's still a really good foundation to start, at least. And to know what that even means. I didn't even know that investing that money was pre-tax or post-tax. I didn't even know that in the beginning. So knowing that now, it's a huge benefit that if you're able to invest that money before it's taxed, you're automatically saving, whatever percentage that is, whatever your tax bracket, percentage is. But I think that was a huge benefit coming out of school.
I think so too. And I think the one thing that I think we should talk about is there's, a bunch of different avenues. So there's, hey, you're coming out of school, or you're going to join an associateship.
Mm-hmm.
There's pros and cons to everything. There's, forks in the road at everything that we make, like those turns that we make in our life. And I think, if you look at associateships working for these bigger companies, a lot of the pros are things like a 401k match,
mm-hmm.
or those benefits that they offer, or all those things. And I think you can really break down each part of that. That's very different than practice ownership. And I think today our goal is to focus on more of that associateship, because I think going into ownership, the tax part of that's very different. There are, all this stuff that, like, my husband, who has a small business,
mm-hmm.
we need to be like acknowledging, like, okay, we need to do things differently on his end than like taking care of what I'm making and how I'm investing my part of that portfolio, and then coming in at the end of the day and being like, okay, how do we make this work together? We have an accountant, thank goodness, that is very good, and that will kind of walk us through some of those things, but he's not our financial advisor. So, which also leads me to think, like, okay, let's talk about different financial advisors. Because
mm-hmm.
going out of school, like you said, there's all these big companies, and I'm not naming any names, that will talk to you and be like, but they're truly like insurance salesmen, like, which isn't, I think, that's not a con or a slight or anything to say to that, but a lot of the times, maybe thinking about, okay, this person's advising me on my finances. They want me to buy insurance, though. They want me to buy a life insurance policy. They want me to buy a short-term disability, and they want me to buy a long-term disability. That is how they make money. So knowing what that advisor makes money on will help you see, and I forget what it's called, when someone is like a financial, like insurance sales, but they offer financial advice as well, but they say that they do that independently, essentially.
Yeah,
there's a
and I
word for
think
it, I can't remember what it is.
the specifics, if I'm being honest, I'm very, I don't have my hands in that pot. I do. And I feel knowledgeable and confident in what I'm investing in and what I'm choosing, to do. But I guess where I'm going with this is, I sat down with my current financial advisor when I was in dental school, and there was another financial advisor at the time, and he pulled up his laptop and he said, just like we do in dentistry, we never want to talk bad about somebody else's business or what they're doing, right? But at the end of the day, they have credentials and they have certain licenses that tell them what they can do, what they can't do, what are your limitations. And he was like, this is mine. And it was X, Y, and Z. There was like 9 of them, right? This is the other guy who is, and it was in like life insurance or whatever it was. So, if you're looking and if you need to do your research and ask those uncomfortable questions on, how do you get paid? What are your qualifications? And how are you going to support me? What are you able to do? What's within your scope of practice, as a financial planner? And how can you help me reach my goals? Ultimately, at the end of the day, everybody needs to get paid, and they should get paid for what they do.
100%.
But, with that, you want to make sure that if you're going to give them a percentage of, what you're investing in, is there going to be a return on that? And are they, well-versed in what they can do,
Yeah. I mean, because, and they always say this when they're talking to like financial advisors, is like, investing money and handling your money can be an emotional thing. So it's one, like you think of that example of, we probably can name names here too, but people that we knew in dental school that would take their loan money and invest it into the stock market.
Right.
And most people, rightfully so, would cringe at that, because if you know the average return on investment in the stock market and the average rate of what your student loan is, that doesn't usually balance out. But then there's also the risk of, hey, I'm going to hire this person to manage my finances for me, which takes the emotion out of like, hey, I'm going to make these decisions. I'm going to like, they're playing with it. Their job is to literally look at money all day and to do those things, or you hope that's what their job is all day. And that goes into like vetting who you're trusting with your finances. And I think there's a lot of sales that are attached to that, but there's also a lot of things that you can gain from like talking to those people while you're still in school and asking them those hard questions about those things. And really for me and for my husband, when we finally got, we got settled, I attended a year and a half of like women's investing meetings, just my own time, going once a month to these investing meetings, discussing, endless podcasts. So I should go back. So the one first financial thing that I would listen to, and this is in my early 20s, was Dave Ramsey. Do you know who Dave Ramsey is?
No.
Okay. So Dave Ramsey was on the radio, so which kind of ages maybe this point a little bit. But he had a radio show, and he would talk, and he still has he's still like very relevant. He's still alive and well, like teaching people finances. But he used to have a radio show, and he would talk about like personal finance stuff, and it was just this guy that would just be like pretty much like a cash pay system. Like you shouldn't have credit cards, you shouldn't be putting things on credit. That's where people get into a lot of trouble. Obviously, for me, like there's a point where you need to have some kind of credit card if you ever want to finance anything. So there's that point of I need to establish some kind of credit, but then have the self-discipline to not overspend. So he has a great system for just any person to be like, hey, I'm putting this in cash, I'm putting these few things on a credit card, like I'm putting my gas on my credit card every month when I'm 20, instead of putting me going out to the bar on my credit card when I'm 20. So those little things then led me to joining a women's investing group, and then listening to, I actually got this idea from one of my women that I met there, was this podcast which is actually based in Colorado. I don't know if you listen to Bigger Pockets,
Mm-hmm.
but that's where I got a lot of my just day-to-day, like, hey, here's some people talking about finance. And I think it's almost like the more you listen to people's stories about their personal finances, the more you're learning, like, oh, like this can be a thing, or this person. And most of the people that are like put on the show or talk about their finances, they're everyday people. They're people that are making a little less than 6 figures a year, and they're able to, work their way, with frugality and different things like that, and it's going to bring them to the next level. So I think that to me resonated a lot because, I grew up with no money. So I was like, oh, okay, so anyone can do this. Anyone can change their outcome of like the financial trajectory of their life. And that really turned me on to the FIRE movement, which is the Financial Independent Retire Early movement. And then my husband was a big proponent of the Mr. Money Mustache. I don't know if you know who that is, but he's also a guy on the internet who's like gives out free advice and free stuff and has a whole thing about all that stuff. And I'm not going to dive into that. Which then led us to being like, oh, we can actually find an independent financial advisor who we can pay hourly to just talk about everything that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now, is like we have our one financial advisor, we have a flat rate with him. It's like $150. We pay him that to talk with us for an hour about all these things that we personally like researched, and we're pretty knowledgeable about them. But that's all he's making. He's not making like money on our investments on the side. Right. He's not making a percentage of things down the road. He's not working for a big company that if we try to pull our money out later, they're going to take a fee of X, Y, Z. And he just gives us the rules. He'll go through, and this is why I'm just like, I get so amped up about finances now, because I think it's so important to feel just, maybe it's like me as a woman, like financial independence to me just means that I don't have to rely on anyone else to figure this out for me. I want to be able to figure this out for myself and gain knowledge from people in like strategic ways, So I think that's where, we bought our house. We decided to go and this is like so much time invested into like learning about these things, but really we're on the trajectory to be financially independent, to use our rentals to pretty much subsidize our entire mortgage. Yeah. With the current mortgage rates being not fantastic. So us being able to buy a house, also being able to save enough money and, cash flow all of these things on our own. I think that all came from just all of those years of just listening to different people and free advice. And then you kind of like take that. It's really time. I think the most thing that I think we lose as we get older is like right now we have more time than we have money. And later we're going to have, it's like that, it's that flip, it's that like caveat of like just living. But I think that's a huge thing that if my younger self was listening, I would be like, hey, listen to these things, but also maybe take the money that you're saving for things and actually invest it. Because I didn't invest when I was younger at all.
Yeah, and how are you saving money? A lot of people just throw money into their traditional savings account. Yes. But you're not getting a good return on that yearly. And for me, I learned early on that I could open up a high yield savings. Mm-hmm. And, that takes it from a 0.01 or 0.1 to a 3.5. When I first opened it, it was almost 5%. Yeah,
during the past, I think that was the biggest thing the past couple of years. They're still pretty high, but there was a lot of those high yield savings accounts that were almost 5%. Oh, yeah. And we have one as well. And I think that was a huge, almost I always knew about money market accounts. I knew a little bit about high yield savings. I just didn't know what that was. But thankfully, my husband has a strong interest in just learning about this stuff too, and he got us one. So
yeah, but it's when you're coming out of school or when you're first starting that job, whatever it may be, you're in your mid-20s and you get that first job and you're like, okay, I have a cushion, I have extra money. It's making small decisions every day to know that money that you're now saving or you're now putting into this account is going to exponentially grow in 10 years. And so I think for me, putting money into that high yield savings has now allowed me to possibly go into ownership, within the near future of a practice. Also, it doesn't have to be decisions based on saving money. It can also be on spending money. It's making, it's funny that you and I just share, like, it's instead of the sisterhood of traveling pans, it's like the sisterhood of like the rental, right? So, it's making the decision of, instead of getting that fancy flat apartment that you could downtown, it's renting someone's rental unit in the backyard,
Oh yeah.
and saving money, saving those expenses, instead of having $4,000 in expenses every month, maybe cut that down to $1,500, take that extra money that you have and put it into investments.
And I think that's actually a really good point, is like coming out of school, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I have, some people get like a bonus for signing on, or they are like, oh, I have like, now I'm actually making some money versus negative money.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, I want to buy this apartment, rent this apartment. And you want to live somewhat of a life because you've been like so frugal for so long. At least like a lot of people have that instinct. I had that like feeling of just, oh my gosh, I've been like really pinching for like decades at this point. And thankfully, like we had the opportunity, like we were living in a studio, like our rent for a year and a half. Well, Ty was living there while I was in school, and then I moved back in and we were living there for about a year and a half. But our rent was so like almost like impossibly low that even though we had to manage like living in a small space together, like there's trade-offs for all these like frugal moments, like you living with your husband or significant other when the only door in your place is the bathroom, which is literally enough room for one person to stand at the sink, and if someone opens the door they hit you with it. And then your kitchen is only one person can stand in it, and your living room is your bedroom, is your dining room, is your kitchen. Like those are sacrifices for you being able to, I mean, we saved more than half of my first year's income within 4 or 5 months. Like that was the amount, like this is much I made. I was able to save literally 50% of what I made that year in 4 months, plus then continuing that for that year and a half, which then as much as we were like at the end of it, like, are we ready to move out of this place yet? Where's the housing market going in Colorado? Yeah. This is a nightmare. And then being like, okay, we're ready. Like we prepared for a year and a half. We were like going balls to the wall with reading and going to all these like different things to learn about different and obviously finding the right real estate agent in that part of it. But it's taking those moments of sacrifice. And also I kind of miss it. I kind of miss that little studio because it was such a simple time where, there's obviously I love our house and I like, all the projects we've done and all that stuff. But I think when I think back on those times, like I knew I would kind of like smile at them and miss them because it's such like a cute time in your life that you're not going to really have later on. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm sure you guys kind of feel that way as well.
Yeah, but it's finding the joy and the sacrifices that you're making and realizing that, I mean, and you guys were the same way, but for us, we're traveling all of the time and, point hacking on credit cards and all of that to try to be able to experience life. But I don't need to come home to this fancy apartment. And I spend most of my time, throughout the day at work or with the people that I love. And, you go home and you want to have a comfy space, but it doesn't need to be a large space. And you don't need to be spending more. You don't need the brand new car out of school. You don't need the fancy apartment. What you should be doing with that money is saving it or investing it early on. So that way, in 15 to 20 years, you're set up, you're in a good place that you can cut back clinically if you want and live your life.
And that's the biggest thing. That's the take-home message is, hey, dentistry is exhausting.
Yeah.
And in 15, 20 years, you're not going to want to be doing this 4 to maybe 5 days a week like when you started off. And when you're able to do that stuff, when you're able to like grind and work, and I mean, you've done this, I've done this, like even as I started my new practice, I was still finishing up days on my old practice. And like working 5 days a week in dentistry, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
It will weigh on you. So being able to know that in 10 years from now, we have a really good plan and the plan changes. Like always. We are almost annoyingly always talking about like, hey, how are we going to adjust like this finance for this month? Or, hey, this is what we want to try to do this. Or, Ty is going back into doing some like education. So he wants to invest into his education a little bit more right now. So then we're like, we're constantly talking about it, but it's also an open dialogue with us, and it's not like, I feel like some couples, it turns into like a very like almost hard thing to talk about is
Right.
finances, because it can be really emotional. But I think that also comes with picking the right partner and talking about those things early in your relationship.
Yeah.
Because if we didn't do that, then we wouldn't have grown to where we are right now, where we can literally be like, hey, let's just chat about this on our way up to skiing. We're able to go skiing midweek because we financially are able to do that.
Yeah.
But also, like, we planned for that. We're planning for these things, and we're like adjusting as we come.
And I think it's mutually agreeing on a foundation together. Like what is the foundation that you're basing all of these decisions on, and making sure that you're in alignment with that. For me, I operate on like a 95-5 rule. You know, if that's, you know, for the month of January, 95% of the time I'm going to be saving my money and investing, cooking at home, you know, doing all of these things that are smart. But there is going to be a 5% where I can get the new tote bag that I would want, right? Or go to Cloud9 at Aspen. You know, there has to be a 5% built in there, because we have to live our lives.
Yeah.
And if we don't have balance in that, then it does become exhausting, and it's hard to find the joy in that. So I want to make, you know, I want to stress that as much as I, you know, am frugal, I also find joy in spending money on experiences. And I think it's important to know that if 95% of the time you're making those smart decisions, that allows for that 5%, and then you're able to have a little bit of fun with it too.
And that's one thing that we actually did talk about this morning when we were driving was, hey, like, we did these things, like when we had like really, like, our budget was super like low. My car was a 95 Camry that was paid off. We had one car that we had, you know, to pay for. Our rent was super low. We were able to travel more then. We were able to be like, hey, like, we're putting money, like, this is our like heavy savings year, but then we're gonna spend a couple more days or weeks out of the year like on experiences. And we've always kind of been that way. We've always been like, we're not doing gifts for each other. We don't do anniversary gifts. We don't do birthday gifts.
Yeah.
We don't do Christmas gifts. We do, hey, we're gonna save for us going to go do this. Yeah. And that's where our expense is. Ty, we were just talking about how he usually goes hunting every year, but hunting also factors into his vacation that he allows for himself through his business of like time he's able to spend away. And we enjoy, now that we have a house, like, we enjoy having people over, we have dinner, we have such a good time in entertaining and doing that kind of stuff. And that to us is more fun than, you know, going out, and that we still want to do that, but it's not as much, because now we're bringing those experiences like into our home and having our friends over and not spending like $300 at dinner. Right. Instead, we're spending, you know, $100 to like have people over for apps or whatever it is. Yeah.
You know, I think it's important to just let everybody know that you don't have to be frugal to the point where you're not enjoying your life, you know, and it's finding joy in those other experiences that may, you know, cost less, but are still very fulfilling. You know, we don't need to go out, you know, and we did. For my birthday, I remember we went to, I think it was Oshkar or whatever. It was an insanely,
that's right,
an insanely nice dinner, but
I almost appreciate those moments more because they don't happen very often. You know what I mean? Like, yes, I like going to, you know, dinner and stuff like that, but I also really like cooking. Like, I like having those moments where I'm like, I just bought a new Bobby Flay cookbook. I love Bobby Flay. It's my number one. If he's ever listening, let me know. He's my favorite chef, and I was like, hey, for my birthday, I bought myself this $30 cookbook. I was like, I'm just gonna buy this because I'm really excited to go back to cooking. I'm also starting like the sourdough journey, which every woman in like the United States has been down at this point, but I'm a little late to the game. But it's just like finding this re-entering that mindset of like the simple things of spending time with your family, spending time with the people that you love. Like, that's kind of where I've always been, but you kind of have this moment in your 20s where you're like, you want to explore, you want to do different things, you want to like expand your horizons, and I think that's very much necessary. But you can also do that very cheap, and not that I want to belabor this, but like there's so many like fun ways to travel for cheap too. Like, I found our Spain trip, this is years before dental school, our round trip flights were $300.
Yeah.
Also, because we went in August when it was hotter than Hades in Spain, and obviously it was like off tourist season, so like it was more. But that's like the kind of traveling we do. We're not traveling to these like elaborate things. Like the most we spend on tickets to fly overseas is like the minimum. Like it's always that like minimum amount,
Right.
and I'm always looking for deals. And like if we're trying to go somewhere, I'm planning that in the off season. Like even in Vietnam, when we went to Vietnam, it was like during an off season, and we got super cheap flights.
And I think, to that point, it's just having the mindset of if I am, aware of this, if I'm aware of what's important long term, then I can make smarter decisions now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, yes, this lavish car or this lavish vacation may bring me joy right now, but when I'm 45, 50, 60 years old, what's going to bring me joy then? And making those small decisions to set yourself up to have a better life later on. So
I agree.
Yeah.
What's not going to make you happy when you're 50 is that you have to work when you're 50.
exactly.
That's
Yeah. So I think, the main takeaways, for financial freedom when we're older is just to make smart decisions now, whether that's finding the right financial planner, investing in a 401k early, really doing the research in the beginning with that extra money that you have, putting your money into a high yield savings instead of a regular savings account.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, once you have that money saved up, what do you do with it? Listening to podcasts. And then, investing in the things that are going to have a long-term reward. Rental properties that then pay off your mortgage. That's huge with the housing market and where it is right now. So
there's so many things, and I think just get started.
Yeah.
Get started, and if you're listening to this like in dental school or right outside of dental school, like most people are like you're young. You're in your 20s when you're leaving these things, and you have plenty of time to try things and make mistakes. I think that's one thing that I always was so afraid of in my 20s was because I was like, oh my gosh, what if I do this and I like mess it all up? Oh my gosh, I should have messed up so much more stuff when I was in my 20s because there's plenty of time to figure it out. So good luck out there.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing your personal experiences to financial freedom, Marsha. We're going to come back next week and talk about surviving dental school. Surviving.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to leave us a comment, rate us, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We appreciate your support and look forward to bringing you more great content.